Well, we've got a lot of chairmen. Well, I want to welcome all of you here this morning, just to make certain that we all remember this meeting is being broadcast over the internet, and so we need to all make our moms proud. Lynn Phillips, the chair of this committee, was unable to provide, was unable to be here today, so you know, I'll do the very, very best I can, and I think that probably we need to just move on to the agenda. Agenda item 2 is approval of the minutes from the December 14th, 2010 meeting. Is there any discussion or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 3, consideration of the approval of the consent calendar. Mr. Chairman.
Because our firm is pursuing one of the projects listed under item 4B, I'm going to recuse myself from voting on this item.
Okay. Okay, is there any other discussion, any questions on any of the other items on the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve same?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
I guess I'm going to need to second that. Since you recused, any further discussion? If none, all those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed? None. Motion carries. Agenda item 4A is consideration of the recommendation of the board for approval of construction, rehabilitation, and property purchase projects. That would be item number 1, Texas A&M University construct Northside Residence Hall. This project will be presented by Mr. Virgil Gay, Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities Planning and Construction, Texas A&M University System. Mr. Gay.
Thank you very much. I have to say that these facilities are quite nice. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. The Texas A&M University is seeking your approval for the Northside Residence Hall. The Residence Hall is going to be constructed in an existing student housing area on the northwest corner of our campus there. It's the first of a planned series of projects to address aging existing facilities on campus that range anywhere from 45 to years old. Now, these facilities are requiring a significant maintenance and do not offer the living environment and amenities that are desired by today's student. To clear the way for these residence halls, 3 existing residence halls, Moore, Crocker, which I stayed in for 3 years actually, and McGinnis halls will be demolished. This slide shows particular data about the project and its funding that you see before you. Total project budget is $58 million. The funding would be primarily bonds to be retired with housing revenue, and the current date for substantial completion of the project is June of 2013. The project will be a 5-story institutional grade structure with exterior materials of masonry, curtain wall, and punch glass windows. The structure will form an internal courtyard opening to the main student housing area quadrangle. The project will create a living learning environment which will include residence units for 600 students, 24-hour desk, administrative offices, lobby, game room, lounge areas, multipurpose study rooms, media room, community learning center, laundry, convenience store, security buildings, support spaces, a lot more than that was there when I was there many years ago. And the site development will include utility relocation, extensions, sidewalks, and site lighting. Next slide. The project meets all the applicable coordinating board standards, so I want to know if there are any questions this time.
Virgil, I had one question. In our project briefing summary, it said that by the way, I lived in Moore Hall, and my father lived in Moore Hall, and it's about darn time you tore down Moore Hall. The 328 rooms that are the total of those 3 dorms that'll be coming down,
Right.
it says are going to be replaced with approximately 600 beds in the new Northside Hall. So in terms of equivalent count, we're talking rooms on one hand, beds on the other. How many?
Yeah, it's equivalent number of beds.
Okay.
Yeah, the 328 rooms equivocate to 600 beds.
Okay.
So we're taking down roughly 600 and putting back roughly 600.
Okay, so
Yes.
we're not gaining space, but we're gaining efficiency and amenities.
Efficiency and amenities, and as most residential life programs now, they're gaining really the living, learning experience and all the other things they do to enhance student life and matriculation through the university.
All right. Well, I heard General Joe Weber recently made a big, strong pitch for this at a group I attended last month, and I know how important it is to students. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
I second.
Just before we vote, there is just one suggestion based on what you and Fred have said is possibly you could have a fundraiser and have the alumni pay to come back and help demolish some of those old doors. Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think 4B was on the consent calendar. Is that correct?
That's correct.
4C, discussion of the board's force's recommendations relating to exceptions to the coordinating board rule 5.4615, essential criterion for the new doctoral degree programs. This is for discussion only. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, this is an update for you on the task force that was comprised of the Chairman Hahn and Dr. Golden to discuss ways that institutions which did not meet the statewide average graduation rate minus UT and A&M for consideration of new doctoral programs, and to provide an alternate path through to allow them to pursue doctoral programs that would still draw attention and focus the institution's attention on the capacity and productivity in their undergraduate programs. And in working with Chairman Hahn and Dr. Golden, what we have come up with is a combination of 3 separate measures which would be evaluated as part of the doctoral proposal process. The first is to look at how many awards, undergraduate baccalaureate awards, are made per the population of the institution, and to compare the 3 measures that we're looking at not only to a statewide average improvement over a 3-year period, and in this case, the chart that you see in your supplemental materials is comparing from FY07 to FY10 how the institution does compared to the statewide average improvement which in the awards per population. And then the second column is the increase in relation to their own performance, whether or not we are seeing year-over-year progress, or in this case, from FY07 to FY10 progress. That is the first measure, and in order to meet that measure, they would have to have attained a positive response for both of those aspects of the measure. So not only compared to the statewide average and compared to themselves. The second measure is the total number of baccalaureates awarded, and it is also an increase. Looking at the statewide average, there was an 8.1 point increase from FY07 to FY10 in the total number of baccalaureates awarded statewide, and the institution would then either meet or fail to meet that standard on the statewide level, and then whether or not from 07 to 10 they saw an increase in their own performance in that same time period. The third measure is the number of baccalaureates awarded to at-risk students, and again we're looking at compared to the statewide increase 07 to 10 and then to their own increase from 7 to 10. and they would have to meet both statewide and their own year-to-year improvements in order to meet that standard. What we are proposing, and in discussion with the chair and Dr. Golden, was to suggest that the institutions need to meet, if they met 3 out of 3 of the criteria, they would still have to provide a plan for how they're going to improve their overall baccalaureate graduation rates for the next 5 years. If they only met 2 of the 3 measures, they would have to provide the plan for the overall baccalaureate graduation rate improvement, as well as a specific plan for improvement on the measure that they did not meet. If they met less than 2 out of 3 measures, if they only met 1 of the measures or none of the measures, then we would not recommend approval to the board of that doctoral program. And so that is where we are at this point. As this was a matter that was up before the board, this is simply a discussion item, and so we would welcome any feedback from the board members with respect to the status of where we are, or any suggestions or recommendations that you would have at this point.
McGregor, a couple of questions, and I commend the task force that also happens to be 2/3 of today's committee on their work on this.
Disagree with us. We've already got you out. No.
Ex officio voting or not.
Point the committee.
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished.
There you go.
But I like the approach. Just a couple things to help me understand the context. The 3 criteria, the number of baccalaureates in relation to student population, you're looking at a ratio over that same 3-year period?
Yes, sir.
What it was 3 years ago, what it is today?
Total undergraduate or total number of baccalaureate graduates divided by the total number of undergraduate students gives us the ratio, and then what the improvement in that ratio is from first year to final year is the measure we're looking at.
And I don't know that we have anybody that would fit this description, but if an institution had a relatively flat increase in the number of degrees but had reduced the proportion of undergraduates to graduate students, then their percentage would have gone up without necessarily producing more undergraduate degrees.
Correct, which would then be evaluated on the second measure, the total baccalaureate degrees awarded.
That's the overall, okay.
And so they would have to meet both.
So I like the fact that it's, you got to at least hit 2 out of 3. Only other thing I would ask, or maybe it's more of a comment, is that this is not intended to change the rule the board adopted, but to provide an exception review process.
It's the implementation process that we will adopt internally, and that we will use when evaluating the standard of the 120 or of the graduation rate. Yes, sir.
So, in terms of next steps, I think it's important that we communicate this so that that institutions understand how it'll work, and it'll be fairly objective, fairly black and white.
Yes, sir.
And predictable.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the intention would be, obviously, this would be the first step when we're reviewing new doctoral programs is, first of all, do they meet the statewide baccalaureate average? And then second, if they do not meet that standard, then we would look at these 3 additional measures before we would then look at the substance of the doctoral program proposal.
Okay. All right. Well, again, appreciate the good work of the task force.
You're welcome. Is there any further discussion? All right, there's no action, so I guess we move, thank you, McGregor. Move to agenda, let's see, item 4D. I don't think that's going to work.
That's lunch. I don't think it's going to work. We'll skip that for now.
4E was on the consent calendar.
E 1 and 3 were, but 4E2
4E2
needs action.
is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the request for the University of Texas of the Permian Basin for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in petroleum engineering. McGregor, I think that's also yours.
Yes, sir. The University of Texas at the Permian Basin has proposed adding a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering. They're obviously in the heart of some of the highest producing oil areas, definitely in the state and in the country. And for that reason, with the current estimates of the Department of Labor and our Texas Workforce Commission, that shows that we are in a high demand need position, and that the existing programs do not have current capacity to meet that. We are recommending approval of the new degree program at Permian Basin. They have in place a number of faculty who have the ability to start the program, and upon approval we'll be adding additional faculty to that program. They have significant support from the petroleum engineering field, and several companies wrote letters of support endorsing adding this to the table of programs at Permian Basin, and felt like that there would certainly be plenty of demand for the graduates from that program. Permian Basin currently has a strong relationship with UT El Paso, and students who can begin their first few years at Permian Basin and then transfer to El Paso. With this program, they will be able to remain in the Permian Basin and complete their degree program. And the staff the commissioner does recommend approval of this program.
Questions?
I'll refrain from any West Texas jokes, Mr. Chairman, about remaining in the Permian Basin.
Remaining in the Permian Basin. All right, if there's no further discussion, is there a motion to approve item 4E2?
Second.
Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. 4E3 was on the consent calendar.
Mr. Chairman, just a general comment or observation, which I made the last time this committee met, because I think it's something we all need to be aware of, and that is that when we approve these degree programs, they're based on, in part, on projected formula funding that is based on historical funding, and rather than the current biennial legislation. So we need to bear in mind that some of these revenue projections may not pan out.
Could be an impact.
Could be an impact. So as we review these at the board meeting and into the future, I think we need to look hard, and I would encourage staff to look hard at how we're projecting the formula funding, or analyzing the institutions.
We had a specific concern about that, and that's why we added that note to make sure the board was aware, and we were looking at it very carefully.
Yeah, I think as the session wears on, that we ought to go beyond the note to either changing the methodology or calculating an alternative contingency plan.
I agree.
And there have been some applications submitted for new degree programs that were based upon special item funding that have been given very strong review and suggestions that perhaps we should wait until after the legislative session to determine whether or not that funding was received before acting on those.
Okay.
So, and you're referring, I mean, in general, but you're talking about this Permian Basin. Procedurally, I guess the degree program is approved, but it can't necessarily be implemented until there's funding for it. Is that what my understanding?
Typically, the institutions will have sufficient startup funding for the first 2 years.
Okay.
Because the formula funds will not be provided to the institution until the next legislative session, when they have a baseline of at least a year of students. And so once the program starts, then unless new dollars are added to the formula dollars of all other degree programs then may get reduced a little bit to make up for the new degree program and additional students that may come into that program for funding.
Okay.
Yeah, using UT Permian Basin's degree as an example, and unfortunately in their case they've got nearly $120,000 cushion, as you see on page 5, in their estimated 5-year revenue exceeding their estimated 5-year costs. So in their case, they could afford a hit of as much as a third of that projected or anticipated new formula funding, and still balance out with their costs. But not all degrees that come before us for approval using the current method of projecting anticipated new formula funding will have that luxury.
Yes, sir.
So just I just bring it up so that this committee and our board are conscious of it, and we look harder at it as we get better information during the legislature.
Shall do.
All right, item 4F is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the request for Texas Tech University Health Science Center for an administrative change to establish a freestanding nursing school at the Texas Tech University Health Science Center El Paso campus. McGregor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an administrative change request, and I'm merely bringing it to you in terms of not having it on the consent calendar because it is a significant change for the institution. Currently, the Health Science Center operates the satellite campus in El Paso as a subunit of the Lubbock College of Nursing. What they're planning to do is, over the long term, they will look at combining the new School of Nursing with the School of Medicine there and creating an independent health science center out of the combined programs. This would be the first step to provide a little bit stronger local direction at the administrative level for the nursing program there, and will provide an additional college in the Health Science Center in Lubbock, so that there will be actually 2 colleges of nursing, one based in Lubbock and one based in El Paso. And they have received some additional funding to support the programs there, and feel like that this may give them some additional leverage to gain some additional funding from the local community if it's seen as there being a stronger independence from the Lubbock campus. And the staff does recommend approval.
Any discussion?
Question.
Go ahead.
I'd like some clarification on administrative structure of what presently exists in terms of how the medical school in El Paso is operating, and how, what do we project that will look like 5 years from now?
Right now, there is a regional campus assistant dean, I believe, or associate dean that manages the School of Nursing. That person reports back to the Texas Tech Health Science Center campus in Lubbock under the College of Nursing. And so they are a part of the campus unit for the College of Nursing in Lubbock, even though they are located in El Paso. Presumably, if they create a separate College of Nursing for El Paso, they will elevate a separate dean for that college, and based upon the population and that type of thing, will then develop whatever additional structure they may need. For the most part, there will not be, I do not believe, a significant change in how they operate within the Health Science Center, in that all of the non-academic elements would remain the same. Finance, HR, and all of those would still be operated through the main campus of the Health Science Center. It is simply allowing them to have a separate dean, much as we would have when a college splits, and instead of being the College of Business and Technology, we create a College of Business and a College of Technology. This is in the same manner. It just so happens that because of the geographic separation, that it's 2 colleges of nursing rather than business and technology. So the structure will remain the same within the college, and will just allow them to have a local dean running the school, as opposed to having to report back to the dean at the main campus. The dean of the School of Nursing will still report to the president of the Health Science Center, or the academic provost of the Health Science Center, as the current dean does for the Lubbock campus. Now, does that answer your question?
It does. I picked up, though, a phrase that you stated that at some point this may be a step towards evolving to some more autonomy on the part of the Texas Tech campus in terms of being able to eventually be a freestanding health science center in itself. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I think that's good.
And I think that that's a long-term plan.
Yeah.
That's not something that they're at the point of deciding to do yet. But I think that is what their long-term goal is, rather than just having a College of Medicine and a College of Nursing, to create the academic structure for a health science center with the attendant allied health programs.
Thank you.
Just one question. As I read the briefing here, it gave me the impression that because of the expansion plans of the area, half a dozen acute area hospitals, that would take care of the facility needs of this separate standing program. Is that correct?
Existing facilities at this time are sufficient, yes, sir.
No anticipated, at least in the 5-year funding projection, there's no anticipated new facility needs.
Not to my knowledge, and not because of this action. This is purely an administrative function. It's not going to change the programs offered, the number of staff, teaching classes, and those type of things. It's merely for the independent administration. So I do not anticipate that any new facilities would result from this action.
Thanks.
Any further discussion? Your second?
Second.
There's no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda item 4G was consent calendar. Agenda item 4H, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the Texas College of Traditional Chinese Medicine for a certificate of authority to grant degrees in Texas. McGregor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is one of the 3 current certificates of authority that the board has authorized. This is a renewal of the certificate for TCTCM. They have gone through a review with external reviewers and gotten a positive recommendation from the Certification Advisory Council, after which the staff and the commissioner reviewed and recommended approval of the certificate of authority for the following 2 years. For TCTCM, they are working on alternative certification, or excuse me, accreditation through other existing accreditors, including those that the board has approved in the past. They are still working on that, and this will give them an additional 2 years to work toward outside accreditation. And again, this is a renewal. They have been under the certificate of authority for the past 2 years.
Okay, your recommendation says pending?
I'm sorry, the reason it was pending, we were waiting on the review from the external reviewers.
But it is now recommend approval?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where is the TCTCM located?
That was going to be
Here in Austin.
Austin, okay.
Does that come as a surprise?
Well, being from West Texas, I'm not going to make any comments.
Being from East Texas, no,
Touche.
will I.
Okay, any further discussion?
It is Eastern Medicine, right?
Yep, that's
Yeah,
correct.
I guess never mind. Listen, I do have a question, if you could, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
You asked the first one, and the second one is that, is this institution affiliated with any academic institutions? Is it freestanding?
It's freestanding.
Is it public or private? Can I ask?
Private.
Private, okay. Could I have an idea of what the enrollment in this institution is?
Very small, and I don't have that handy, but we can get that for you.
Okay. What agency or what board in Texas oversees the licensure of these graduates? Do we have an answer to that? Would it be the state medical
I think
board?
it's the State Board of Licensing.
I think acupuncture will fall under the state board of
Or is it Allied Health?
medical board. I think would license the acupuncturists. I think.
I think
I'd
you're
like
right.
clarification of that at some point if you
I think
can.
it's under the Allied Health, so I think you're right.
Okay. But this institution is not receiving any public dollars.
No public state dollars and no federal financial aid should be going to them because they are not accredited by a national accreditor, so I do not believe
Okay, so students are not receiving loan monies for this to go to this institution.
Not federally subsidized loans.
Any state loan money going here?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
A second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item 4I was on the consent agenda. 4J proposed rule change, is proposed rules. 4J1 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 4, Subchapter P, Section 4.261 of Board Rules concerning standards and criteria for distance education programs. You have supplemental materials for this. Members, McGregor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a fairly straightforward revision to the rules. At present, the rules require that any existing degree program that at the doctoral level that wishes to be taken to an online or distance education delivery has to be, that change has to be approved by the board. What we're proposing is that since the program has already gone through the board for approval initially to award the doctoral programs, that we remove the board, allow the board not to have to review those requests for new distance education authority, and simply authorize the commissioner to make those decisions. Basically, what we were suggesting is that since the board's already approved the program, the delivery method is something that the commissioner and the staff could review and ensure that the quality was going to be carried out by the institution and not place it on the board's agenda for consideration. So it's just a delegation of authority to the commissioner to approve distance education service for a doctoral program.
For an already approved doctoral program.
For an already approved program.
That does require a vote of this committee?
Yes, sir, because it is a rule change, and so it will have to go through the committee and to the board as well.
Any discussion?
No, I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item 4J1, let's see, 1 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 4, Subchapter P, Section 4.261. Is that the same one?
Yeah.
Next one.
We're on J2.
Sorry. Well, I liked it, so I was just going to do it again.
Well, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 4, Subchapter Q, Section 4.275 of Board Rules concerning standards and criteria for off-campus and self-supporting program. We also have supporting material members. McGregor?
Thank you. And this is a follow-on to the last one, merely instead of it being distance education, being off-campus, the distinction being whether it's going to be a face-to-face program or one offered through online education and the like. And because we have the rules separated to handle those two types of programs distinctly, we're merely asking for the delegation of authority to the commissioner to approve off-campus doctoral programs in like manner to what you just approved for online or distance education doctoral programs that have already been approved by the board for delivery.
Okay. Any discussion?
I'm not, I see the one comment we got from UT Pan Am regarding study abroad courses. I don't know how many Texas institutional-based study abroad programs we have for doctoral candidates, but this rule has absolutely no impact on that, does it?
No, sir. And the designation would only be to a staff member. Their concern was that if someone else was appointed.
Well, that was their comment on the previous rule.
I'm sorry.
The one for this rule, since it deals not with online but with any off-campus
No, sir.
program, their concern seemed to be with losing formula funding for study abroad courses.
No, sir.
Which, I mean, the response.
This should not affect that at all.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay, or no, or whatever. Motion carries. Agenda item 4J3 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 5, Section 5.43, 5.44, and 5.52 concerning definitions, presentation of requests, and steps for implementation and assessment of existing degree programs. We also have supplemental material. McGregor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of changes in here that we are making that are of importance to the manner in which we are reviewing both proposed programs and current and existing programs. The first change of significance provides a definition for a compelling academic reason. Currently, institutions are required to only require students to complete a bachelor's degree of 120 hours unless there is a compelling academic reason for there to be a higher requirement. We are defining compelling academic reason to mean programmatic accreditation requirements. In other words, if it's an engineering program and the engineering program requires 135 by ABET, then we would take that into consideration in the approval process. Statutory requirements, as well as requirements for licensure and graduates, so that if there is something in the field that requires a student to take a certain number of hours in order to be licensed, that would be taken into consideration when approving the new program. The second part is the proposal to require the review of all master's and doctoral programs at public universities and health-related institutions. The reason for this is that it is of the benefit to the students, to the program, and to the institution to have regular reviews of their graduate programs. Most accreditation cycles vary between 5 and 10 years of review for their doctoral programs if there is an accreditor for a particular program. What we are trying to do is require that all institutions conduct reviews of their graduate programs on a 7-year cycle, not requiring them to do an independent review if they already have an accreditor who is conducting that review in its place. And that was one of the concerns that was raised by some of the institutions, was whether or not they would have to do 2 reviews, one for us and one for their accreditor, and we are absolutely not requesting that at all. We merely want to make certain that there are regular reviews of those programs. The final is that we are going to be requiring the institutions to provide, in addition to the site review, self-evaluations of the program, so that we know that they are taking an in-depth look at the programs and the progress, faculty salaries, all the issues that need to be evaluated on a regular basis, including productivity, class sizes, amount of research dollars brought in, all of the issues that you would consider under the 18 characteristics that we look at when proposing new programs or reviewing them ourselves. And so we are merely trying to put into our rules a mechanism by which the state and the institutions themselves know what the standard is by which they will be evaluated and by which their institutions will be reviewing their doctoral and master's programs. We did receive several comments, and there were none that were of major significance in terms of major changes that were necessitated by it. We did provide feedback to the institutions indicating that if they had existing reviews, that those would be could take the place of it, and there were some concerns about the 120-hour limit, which we're putting in hard. In other words, saying you have to have 120 hours for any new proposed bachelor's program unless there are those exceptions to the rule. The remainder of the comments we did not feel needed to be acted upon, and for that reason we do recommend approval of the rule changes, as we believe it will be beneficial to the institutions and the programs at the whole.
So, McGregor, since we just got these comments and responses, I'm kind of scanning through them. It looks like we did make 3 changes or additions to the original proposed rule
Yes,
changes.
sir, I believe that's right.
552 C11, D11, and C9. If I'm just looking at the summary without going to the language, C11 and D11 serve the same purpose, which is what you started out explaining. It allows them to submit the third-party accredited review in lieu of, logically, in lieu of
Doing
doing
it that
2.
way.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so those 2 rule changes merely make that clear.
Yes, sir. And that was our intention all along, so we appreciated the comment.
Yeah. I don't blame them for wanting that to be spelled out in the rules.
No, sir.
Now what is this about the other change on UT El Paso's request that rule amendments be altered, adding additional criteria for the review of doctoral programs, quote, faculty credentials?
There was a question as to whether or not, you're talking about the virtual review? I'm sorry.
Well, it's the very
No,
last
it's
comment.
Oh, the last
on
comment.
the 3rd yellow page.
Yes, sir. And faculty qualifications is one of the criteria that needed to be included, and so we did add that.
So
It was just it was a mistake on our part that it was not included in the doctoral review process. It was included in the master's review, and it was just an oversight on our part.
okay. You're publicly acknowledging that our staff occasionally makes mistakes?
I think everybody will tell you I'm not perfect.
The last question I have is why a 7-year cycle as opposed to 3
We worked
or
with
5?
the Graduate Education Advisory Committee, which is composed primarily of deans of graduate schools, and that was the recommendation that was made from GIAC, was to go on a 7-year cycle, recognizing that some accreditors are on 5 and some on 10. The vast majority of doctoral programs do not have accreditors, and so it was felt like that going on a 7-year cycle would not inconvenience the vast majority of programs and would not be so onerous as going to a 5-year cycle, which was actually what was an initial point of discussion with the staff, was to start at a 5-year cycle, and it was felt like going to a 7-year cycle was somewhat of a compromise between a 5 and 10-year, and we felt like 10-year was too long.
Yes. This, of course, is a qualitative review.
In part, they will be using the 18 characteristics, which GIAC has recommended and we've adopted for all doctoral programs. And so they will be reviewing a lot of quantitative material. But in terms of the overall review itself, the evaluators will be doing primarily a qualitative evaluation in comparison with other programs of similar nature.
And the reason I ask is that in looking at this as a 7-year cycle, when we're reviewing all degree programs for low production, bachelor, master's, and doctoral, that is on a 5-year cycle, is it not?
It's actually on a rolling cycle, so that programs will always be under review for low productivity. It is based upon a 5-year cycle, 5-year average. So in other words, there have to be 25 graduates over the 5-year period.
5-year period.
Correct, for it to be above low productivity for a baccalaureate program. So that would be an average of 5 per year, but it's not only done every 5 years. It's done on a rolling basis for the preceding 5 years.
Okay. So that's really actually an annual evaluation of low productivity.
Yes, sir.
All right. Good.
And that was a change because in the past it had been on a 4-year cycle.
Chairman, could I?
Go ahead.
McGregor, help me understand, and I'm sure there's a reason for this, but in order for any institution to maintain accreditation, they go through SACS review every 10 years,
Yes, sir.
correct? Why is it necessary that we implement another accreditation process or review when we already have one in place that's mandated and necessitated out of rules and regulations? Are we putting another additional regulatory mechanism in place that's truly necessary? I'm just asking.
Yes, sir, it is. We do believe that it is necessary. The SACS accreditation is not done at the programmatic level. It is at the institutional level.
That's correct.
And so from that perspective, the individual programs themselves are not actually being reviewed and evaluated by disciplinary experts. and to ensure that the quality of the program, the curriculum, the faculty, the student support, the financial aid is being carried out at the programmatic level in accordance with national standards and processes. And it was felt that many of the institutions already have regular doctoral program and master's program reviews, and typically programs that are at the doctoral level will be able to have the review done for baccalaureate, master's, and doctoral level programs at the same time. So it's not required to do multiple searches, multiple reviews, one for the master's level and one for the doctoral level. Is it additional effort that the institutions will have to undertake? Yes, it is. Is it necessary? We believe it is, because it will ensure and help to promote quality programs that have the necessary support that they need for successful operation and excellence.
Thank you.
McGregor, the comment from UT El Paso about the 5th and 10th year, are we talking about two different things here with the SACs and the, I don't know, GIAC, or what? I'm having trouble with all these acronyms, but is the, if I understood what you just said, the SACs is an institutional review versus
A programmatic.
the Graduate Education Advisory Committee is the program, the overall
The Graduate Education Advisory Committee is composed of graduate deans and faculty members from graduate programs. And it was their recommendation that we go with a 7-year instead of a 5-year, simply because that they felt like 5-year was very frequent, and 10-year we felt like was too long, and so that was kind of a negotiated middle ground. If El Paso's recommendation to review on basically a 5-year basis, we felt like would have been contravening the discussion and the recommendation of GIAC, and so that is why we went with the 7 years as opposed to a shorter time frame or a longer time frame.
Okay, so as far as, in this particular instance, a university that is looking for accreditation through the SACs, if they do it every 7 years, is that satisfactory as far as their accreditation?
Yes, sir.
So they won't,
SACs
they'll
actually
just have
does
to do
not-
it every 7 years. They won't have to do one every 7th year and one every 10th year.
At present, SACS does not require an institution to conduct disciplinary programmatic reviews
Okay.
on any particular
So
cycle.
they will still be different reviews then?
Yes, sir. The SACS review will be handled on a 10-year, every 10 years. And certainly the evaluators for the degree programs will want to know that the institution is still accredited and that there are not any major outstanding issues which SACS identified which could impact at the programmatic level. But SACS accreditation is the very base level review for an institution and looks at primarily the overarching infrastructure and academic support areas rather than the specific programmatic level. And so
Governance, it considers finances,
Right.
it's the overall health of the organization, and it doesn't really look at specific programs at all. And so this is very different in looking at, sorry, my voice is a little off today, but it's really looking at the health of individual programs versus the overall institution. If an institution has problems through SACS, it will have an impact, as McGregor was saying, on individual programs potentially, but it addresses in no way really the individual quality of any doctoral program on campus.
Okay, so you will be looking at specific, like a doctor's degree in engineering
yes, sir.
instead of
Correct.
the whole umbrella. Okay, very good.
SACS is big picture. This is narrow focus.
Okay. Any further discussion? Not, is there a motion?
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. 4J4 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to proposed amendments to Chapter 21, Student Services, Subchapter NN, Section 21.2105.
It is.
Is it?
I just looked at it.
Okay.
I think 4 through 7 are all on consent.
4 through 7 are all, I've got 5 through 7 on consent. Oh, did we move this to consent?
It was on the original consent calendar that was sent out.
Okay.
4J4 was,
Is on consent.
I think it was removed, was it not?
It's still shown in the books handed out today as being on the consent calendar.
I'm sorry, that, Dan?
I understand that this was pulled off of the consent. Good morning.
Good morning. We did get one comment back from UT Arlington that we can go through, and I don't know if they have the supplemental.
Yeah, we do have supplemental.
Yeah. And I'll turn it over to Jane to go over the comments that they submitted.
Good morning. The University, excuse me, the University of Texas at Arlington submitted 3 comments regarding our proposed rule changes for the what we call the Hazelwood Act, which is a tuition and partial fee exemption program for Texas veterans. The first comment had to do with the removal in our proposed rules of a comment indicating that if a student were late in providing proof of eligibility for the exemption and didn't provide that information by the census date, then the institution it became an optional exemption as opposed to a mandatory one. That had been in our rules in the past. We reached the conclusion that we did not have authority to say that indeed it was an entitlement, and therefore our rule change here is to remove that reference to the deadline and indicate that the institution or that the exemption is valid whenever the student provides proof. The comment from the University of Arlington, UT Arlington, is that this will work a hardship on the institutions in that it is not unusual for a student to arrive on the last week of class and prove eligibility, or to try to prove eligibility for a previous semester. The problem is that there doesn't appear to be anything in statute that allows to set a deadline of any sort, and therefore we chose not to, we continued with our rule change to remove the wording about the deadline. The second comment from UT Arlington had to do with our removing or indicating that the only default on a student loan that was relevant to eligibility for Hazelwood is an indication that you're in default on a loan made or guaranteed by the state of Texas. This is in conjunction or in agreement with the current statutes. At one time, it was a broader restriction, and when that restriction was taken out of statute, we simply had failed to remove it from our rule, and so this was a cleanup in our rule. And again, the comment from the institution is this is difficult for the schools because other programs do have restrictions about federal loans as well as state, so this will be out of step with their other programs, but in accordance with current statutes for Hazelwood, we had to make this change in that the federal defaults are not relevant to eligibility for Hazelwood. The third comment from UT Arlington had to do with the reporting indications in the proposed rules. We had taken out the old language and added new language. I believe the new language is almost verbatim from the current statute. Hazelwood is a complex program. A student is eligible potentially for 150 hours of this exemption, and there's a database used for tracking the student where they are in that 150-hour stream. We have new statutes that allow spouses and children into the program, and our original database has become too simplistic to accommodate the complexity of the program as it now exists. We're in the process of testing a new report, and it will require specific input from the Veterans Affairs officers at the institutions, as opposed to allowing us to pull data that we were already receiving through the enrollment reports. Again, it's a valid point that this will make reporting more difficult for the institutions, but we don't feel we have a choice but to move in this direction. So again, in all three situations, we were unable to accommodate their suggestion. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to respond.
Has this gone through the board's data collection committee?
I believe it has, and I'm
It's
sorry,
required
I
by
will have to
rule
check. Sir?
It's required by board rules to go through that committee.
Right. I will confirm and make sure that's true. That new report is not yet in place. It's in the testing mode, so we'll make sure that that occurs if it has not.
So, David, if that's the case, if we don't know that, can we approve this item?
I think deferral would be better. I mean, even before the development, these should be reviewed by that committee.
Okay. So do we need to table this item then?
But there would be time to address it before the April board meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we defer this item, postpone taking a vote until the full board meeting in April.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, the item's tabled. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, 5, 6, and 7 were all on the consent agenda. 4K, discussion of the status of the United States Department of Education list of accreditors. McGregor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was an item that Dr. Phillips had requested that we include on the agenda, and basically the only update I have is that the U.S. Department of Education is still looking at their all of their accreditors, including the ones that we have recognized as national accreditors, and so until such time as they take action, I have nothing new to report, and we can go from there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions? No action required. Move to item 4L, an update of the coordinating board's priorities for the 82nd Texas legislative session. Linda Battles, Associate Commissioner, will provide an update on the agency's legislative appropriations requests, and Dominic Chavez, Senior Director of External Relations, will provide an update on pertinent legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, members. What we're going to be providing you with today shouldn't be new if you've been able to keep up with the Commissioner's weekly legislative updates, but feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. Judy's handing out some handouts for you that we'll walk through very quickly. To give you an idea of where the legislature is currently in the appropriations process, specifically relating to higher education funding, I've provided you with the flow chart that looks like this. And I've indicated with an asterisk where we are in terms of higher education funding for each chamber. So you'll see that in the Senate, we are sort of not have made as much progress or any progress in higher education funding because Chairman Ogden has charged two subcommittees, a subcommittee on public education and a subcommittee on Medicaid, to work out those funding issues prior to getting into any other funding areas. He did just yesterday charge two additional subcommittees to look at public safety and fiscal matters. At this point, we really don't know what the subcommittee on fiscal matters is looking at, so we'll be closely monitoring that committee, which is actually meeting this morning. On the House side, you'll see a lot more progress has been made. The full House Appropriations Committee adopted the subcommittee's recommendations last week, and tomorrow it's expected that the full committee will vote out the committee substitute for House Bill 1. The recommendations by the subcommittee included funding increases for a few of the programs that we administer here at the coordinating board. And in your green handout, I provided you with a summary of what those changes were. Essentially, the subcommittee recommended an additional $17.2 million to restore funding for the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program to reach its 10-11 base level. We're looking at serving about 9,900 students with this amount. And again, as a reminder, this is a need-based grant program for students enrolled at public community colleges and technical colleges. The subcommittee also recommended an additional $6.2 million to restore the Texas Work Study Program to its 10-11 levels, and this will serve approximately 8,800 students next biennium. $15 million was added for the Professional Nursing Shortage Reduction Program, and as a reminder, this program was funded at $42.3 million in the current biennium. And the purpose is to increase the number of graduates from professional nursing programs and to increase nursing faculty. An additional, the subcommittee also recommended $3.4 million for the Centers for Teacher Education, and this program provides funding to the 5 private historically black colleges and universities for the purpose of supporting their Centers for Teacher Education. $3.2 million was added for the Alzheimer's disease centers, and these funds support the consortium of Alzheimer's disease centers that do collaborative research to improve early diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of Alzheimer's disease. And $1.7 million was added for adult basic education. This was, as a reminder, funded at $9.5 million in the 10-11 biennium. And this provides education and training to adults who are unemployed or underemployed. And finally, they adopted a $50 million contingency rider. This would be funds from the Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation to go to the Texas Grant Program. Yes.
Talk briefly about the rider process, especially contingency riders.
This particular contingency rider is a bit unique because it's really dependent on what the feds decide in terms of our ability to receive those funds from Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation. But in general, a contingency rider will appropriate funds contingent on availability of funding or contingent on passage of enabling legislation. Most of the contingency riders that the subcommittee recommended for adoption went into what's called the wish list, which is Article 11. And so if the legislature ends up finding additional funds, they can look at those contingency riders in Article 11 to see if they want to fund any of those. And then there's other contingency riders throughout the Article 3 and Article 9 that's contingent on legislation.
This one, is this in Article 11, this particular?
This one is in Article I'll have to check to see if it's in Article 3 or Article 11. Let me get back with you on that.
Let me put it this way. Does this require any enabling state legislation, or is it totally dependent on federal decision?
That's a good question. The way that Chairman Hochberg laid this out in committee, he said it was dependent on what the Fed said. In the Senate, there is a similar rider that is contingent on passage of legislation to allow this to happen. So we're not exactly, I've not been able to see the rider language yet. The bill is being printed as we speak, and we hope to have that available to us tomorrow.
Members, this is, all these are critical, but this is really critical because let's not forget that in our revised exceptional items, we identified an increase of $400 million for level funding in the Texas grant, or when I say level funding, level service, the ability to meet 70% of the estimated demand for the needy students applying for the Texas grant. So $50 million is a much appreciated contingency rider, but it's, it's
350
1/8.
million short.
Yeah, it's 350 million short of what we really need to maintain, what we've been providing for Texas students.
As you'll recall, the HB1 has $365 million for Texas grants in the bill, and that will cover renewal students only.
Right.
So 29 of our programs still remain unfunded, and our administrative budget and FTE count still reflect a 15% cut. Overall, our total cut is $855.3 million, or a 47.8% cut over the 10-11 biennium.
In CSHB1?
Yes, sir. In regards to the coordinating board's proposal on outcomes-based funding, we actually have good news, but we also have bad news. The good news is that the House Appropriations Committee adopted a rider that implements the coordinating board's proposal for universities on outcomes-based funding. There was no discussion on momentum points for community colleges, although there seemed to be an interest on Chairman Hochberg's part to learn more about that, but we really didn't get to it. So what we've done is we do have a rider. The subcommittee did recommend it to the full committee, and the committee adopted the rider that implements it for universities. The House Appropriations Committee also voted out the committee substitute for House Bill 4, which is the supplemental appropriations bill for the current biennium. This bill implements the 5% budget reductions that we were ordered to prepare for last year for the current biennium, in addition to the 2.5% reduction for FY11. And you'll recall that last year, the commissioner charged the coordinating board staff to evaluate each of our programs and gave us 3 guiding principles in determining where to apply the cuts. The first was to preserve as much as possible those programs that contribute the most to achieving the goals of closing the gaps and the accelerated plan for closing the gaps. We also attempted to minimize reductions to students, particularly low-income students, and we did not impose across-the-board cuts. So the handout that you have in front of you is a spreadsheet that we showed you about a year ago that reflects those cuts that we discussed with you previously. And I can walk you through this, or we can move on, whatever is your pleasure.
What's your pleasure? I think it's pretty understandable, Linda.
Okay. So our target, our overall target for budget reductions for this current biennium is $80.9 million. $57.5 million of that is general revenue, and $23.4 million of that is general revenue dedicated. And finally, the House Appropriations Committee also voted House Bill 275, which is the rainy day fund, tapping into the rainy day fund, about $3.1 billion for closing the budget gap for this current biennium. It also, in total, state agencies and institutions of higher education were able to identify $800 million in reductions, and then the comptroller identified $300 million in revenue from sales taxes. And so with the $3.1 billion from rainy day fund, that does achieve closing the budget gap for the current biennium. It has been stated that no further funds from the rainy day will be tapped into for the next biennium.
Was that language actually in that bill that passed? Or?
It was actually in a letter that was read aloud by Chairman Pitts during the House Appropriations Committee. So I've not actually seen the letter, and I know there's been some press and articles written about it. So
okay.
That is my understanding. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Dom to give you an update on where your key legislation is. Oh, any questions?
Thank you. Dr. Golden?
Linda, I'd like for you to clarify 2 points, please. Number one, give me some clarification on momentum points. I heard you say that wasn't, I'm sorry.
It's your,
I heard you say that the momentum points was not, as I understand it, acted upon.
correct.
Does that mean it won't happen this session, or will it, it's just, is it still on the table?
It's still on the table. It's still early in the process. We still have the Senate to work with, and we will certainly be talking to the Senate Finance Committee, and we have been talking to them on the Senate side, as all of the legislators over there. On the House side, I didn't hear publicly that there was any serious concerns about it. I think they just really ran out of time. After the full committee adopted the subcommittee's recommendations, Chairman Hochberg, who's the chair of the subcommittee on Article 3, invited the commissioner and staff back the next day to give a mechanical overview of the outcome-based model for universities, and he had included community colleges, but we just didn't get to it in time. So
Yeah, I think there's an expectation that Chairman Hochberg's subcommittee still plans to take testimony and get to it when they're, hopefully fairly soon.
we've not been told otherwise, so that's my assumption at this point.
The other clarification is that, are you saying that the budget has been balanced?
For the current biennium, according to the committee substitute for House Bill 4. So I don't know what the Senate bill is going to look like. They have filed a bill. I understand there's going to be a committee substitute. So I presume they'll be able to balance it as well, and then those two bills will come to conference, and then they'll work out whatever differences before it goes to the governor for signature.
Yeah, the reason I raise the question is because of the uncertainties that all of our institutions face with regard to funding. And as soon as we can get some clear idea as to when that budget is going to be balanced, the better off our agency, number one, and number two, all of the institutions are going to be able to do budgeting, which a lot of them will be doing during the summer. And I'm sure it will be the fact that they're this far along is encouraging to me. I had even thought that they may have to have a special session in order to solve some of these issues with redistricting and balancing the budget. But apparently they're pushing this on through to a point where some of these answers are going to be available to us, and some of the uncertainties in terms of funding that's going to be solved a little more quickly than I anticipated, which is good. Thank you.
A lot can happen between now and the end of the session, so I can't speculate on that.
But you would anticipate that we won't have a final answer on the budget until the end of session?
That's correct.
Day before maybe the end of session, and then 21 days for the governor's veto period in which he can line item.
Any other questions? Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Dom?
Good morning. I'll just give you a brief update. Again, you should be receiving our updates, weekly updates, and we're trying our best to keep you up to speed. As you can appreciate, the session, the pace is starting to quicken quite a bit down at the legislature. And in fact, in your blue book on this item, you'll notice the date there. Some of this is outdated information because of printing, so I'll try to bring you up to speed on a couple key points. First of all, filing deadline has come and passed. It was on March 11th. And so there was a flurry of activity, although overall I think we're looking at somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 less bills between last session and this session, partly because of the budget, I'm sure, is part of the issue there. But there are a lot of important higher education bills, a lot of major reform bills that have been filed, even though the volume has declined. Just to kind of walk you through this chart, I'll highlight a couple in here, and then I'll highlight a couple that aren't in here that were filed as of March 11th. First, the House Bill 9 and House Bill 10 by Chairman Branch. House Bill 9 is the outcomes-based funding legislation. This legislation is designed to go hand in hand with what is happening in the appropriations process. This legislation does not execute outcomes-based funding, but it essentially provides the coordinating board guidance and directive to include student success measures and outcomes-based measures in our biennially required formula funding recommendations that you all approved last fall that we submitted to the legislature. And so that legislation has actually been voted out of committee, and we're waiting for a vote on the House floor to be scheduled relatively soon. House Bill 10 is the Texas Grant Priority Model. That's Chairman Branch's version that essentially implements the recommendation from this board for 2 of 4 criteria, as you are all aware. Again, that bill has also been voted out of committee and is awaiting scheduling on the House floor. For some of the legislation on the House side that's not in your packet that I want to highlight very quickly, one is House Bill 1000. By Chairman Branch, which is a piece of legislation that is looking to define in statute the methodology for distributing the National Research University Fund. That bill is to be heard, I believe, tomorrow in front of House Higher Education Committee. There's also a number of variants of that bill, both on the House side as well as on the Senate side, on how those funds should be distributed. We fully expect that there's going to be a lot of negotiation over this legislation, particularly between Senator Duncan, Senator Zaffarini on the Senate side, and Chairman Branch on the House side in terms of the mechanics of distributing those funds, but they want to essentially take care of that in statute as opposed to providing the coordinating board to determine the methodology. So that legislation will be moving, and we should see some movement on that relatively soon, and we'll get a better picture of how they're going to negotiate that out. House Bill 30. Yes, sir.
Are there some other bills listed in our materials that are, as you said, other versions of HB 1000?
I don't believe in here because I think most of those pieces of legislation were filed late.
So do you know off the top of your head what the other...
It's in this large packet. I'll get you that answer. We'll provide that to you. The other variants of it, there's some legislation by Representative Coleman that has a variant of the NREF distribution, and I believe Senator Duncan has filed with Senator Zaffarini as a co-author on the Senate side. But we'll get you the specifics, and we can outline the differences between those and provide that to you.
And we've been asked at least by some of these legislative leaders for recommendations. I think the commissioners had some discussions. Do you want to comment on any of those regarding the NREF distribution?
Well, we really haven't had a lot of conversation about it. No, so I really don't know what to add.
Well, in terms of Chairman Branch has, just literally yesterday afternoon, I believe McGregor Stevenson has been in contact. They've been floating suggestions our way, asking us for our input. I'm not sure that we've provided a recommendation as to this is how it ought to be accomplished, but we have provided feedback on we're looking at this element or that element. What impact would that have? What would the coordinating board be able to do with that respect? So those conversations have, but in terms of specific methodology, here's the coordinating board's recommendation.
I was really referring to the former about specific elements.
Correct.
All right, go ahead. That answers my question.
One other piece of House legislation, House Bill 3025, which is also on the House Higher Education Committee agenda for tomorrow. This is the legislation that is based in large part, almost exclusively with a few exceptions, on recommendations from this board related to improving transfer and the efficiency of transfer between universities and community colleges. Included in that legislation is one of the cost efficiency recommendations related to filing a degree plan and mandating that students get on a degree plan. That element is in this legislation. The transfer compacts or transfer articulation agreements that was part of the cost efficiency recommendation are in this legislation, as well as a couple other provisions that the coordinating board staff, particularly McGregor Stevenson staff and others who have helped Chairman Branch craft the legislation to make transfers much more efficient and improve the transfer rates in Texas and to do some of those cost efficiency things that we've been talking about, you've been talking about as a board for some time now.
What is the bill number for that?
3025. That's Chairman Branch. Switching over to the Senate side, just a couple highlights. Again, other than what you see in here, I do want to point out Senate Bill 28, which is the Senate version of the Texas Priority Model, Texas Grant Priority Model. It is a little different than the recommendation from this board. Rather than a 2 of 4 configuration, it is a 1 of 3 configuration as filed and considered by the committee. They have taken out the requirement for TSI readiness as one of the categories that a student should meet to gain priority status. That bill has been heard. It has not been voted out of committee. There's quite a bit of negotiation ongoing between members of the committee and the Senate, and so we'll see how that works itself out. But if those two pieces of legislation clear both chambers, we can probably fully expect, if Senate Bill 28 stays in its current configuration, that there will be some negotiation between the two chambers on, do you do a 2 of 4 or do you do a 1 of 3? But just to give you a sense of how that's moving on the Senate side. A couple other notes. Senator West has filed Senate Bill 1564 related to developmental education. He had specifically asked the coordinating board for various ideas on developmental education and developmental education reform that we've been working on, and so our staff provided him a number of those recommendations, and I know the Deputy Commissioner David Gardner was meeting with Senator West and his staff yesterday, helping them craft language and think of different ideas for that legislation. So Senator West has taken a keen interest in that issue. Senate Bill 1799, that is some legislation that we need to expand and to continue the Hinson Hazelwood loan program, the college access loan program by the other name that we use. That's some legislation that Senator West has also filed, and that was one of your recommendations from last fall. So in a nutshell, those are just some of the highlights. What we will do is continue to update you on the major pieces of legislation weekly as these things move through session. I will point out that you'll recall you approved a large packet of various recommendations at your October board meeting for the legislature to consider. All but less than a handful of those ideas have been filed in legislation in various forms in the House and Senate. And the ones that have not been filed, we feel like there are opportunities to include those in other pieces of legislation as the session progresses. So I think that is a testament that the legislature does listen to the board and its recommendations enough to put those into the legislative session and consider them. So we will keep you updated as that progresses. And just to give you a sense going forward, from the standpoint of the Texas, the House Higher Education Committee, they've kind of given us an indication that for House bills to be heard in a timely enough fashion for them to clear the House and have a chance for progress in the Senate, that they're looking around a mid-April time frame on when they would need legislation to be out of House committee to accomplish that. So that kind of gives us a bearing that we have about 2 or 3 weeks for, again, House bills to clear that committee in enough time for them to get it on the House floor over to Senate with a chance for passage in the Senate. And in fact, the House Higher Education Committee is actually looking at double stacking meetings. In fact, they're considering holding an extra meeting this week on Thursday to try to move some of this legislation related to higher education that there's an interest in proceeding. So we should start seeing a lot of activity very quickly. With that, I'm happy to answer any particular questions. I do want to, before I close out on the legislation, I do also want to mention that we have been following up with members of this committee and the full board about meeting with legislators, particularly for those of you who have to seek nominations through the nominations committee. I know Vice Chairman Hahn has a busy schedule this afternoon, so I'm looking at the clock here to make sure we get you down there, but we have you slated for a number of meetings. We also have Board Member Agrawal scheduled to meet with Senator Watson and Ellis today and tomorrow, and so other members of the board that are interested, we've tried to plug you in as both your time and efforts and energy allow. we're happy to continue to do that, and we'll coordinate those meetings from the coordinating board and make those happen. And in terms of the nominations committee, we still do not have a date set for the members. That's through no fault of the members' fault or the staff. It's a function of the nominations committee not wanting to proceed until the governor announces the final 2 nominations for the board vacancies that have occurred over the last couple of months. So we're in a holding pattern, and as soon as we get word on the nominations committee process, we will let you know and provide you that information and schedule those hearings. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dom, I suspect the answer to this is no, but, or you would have alluded to it already, but have in particular HB 1460 and HB 3025 been scheduled for hearing?
HB 3025 is scheduled for a hearing. They're going to schedule for tomorrow. It will be heard tomorrow.
And 1460 not yet?
1460 has not been scheduled for a hearing. There are a number of different, and for the sake of the other members, 1460 is the cost efficiency legislation that Chairman Branch filed early in the session. It includes a number of recommendations from the coordinating board from our cost efficiency study, particularly related to faculty workload, related to off-campus or alternative instruction methodologies, as also elimination of a couple of reports that we identified as unneeded. The chairman has stepped back from that legislation, not in terms of not wanting to do it, but allowing the systems and the institutions to weigh in on what are some other administrative, operational, reporting, and other things that we can make from an institutional and system perspective. We can make things more cost effective. And so this bill is becoming much more than what it was originally filed as. There's also a number of other pieces of legislation out there doing very similar things. For example, Senator Zaffirini has filed some legislation, Senate Bill 5, that it looks at reporting requirements and some of these other operational efficiencies. So the short answer is 1460 has not been scheduled. The long answer is I think there's absolutely a interest in moving it. It's right now it's the process of adding to it and really putting more stuff into it to be more of a comprehensive cost efficiency legislation. And so as soon as we get more information, we kind of play it every week after they knock out their week of current bills. We work with them very closely to identify what's the next rung. So I fully expect something will move. It's just 1460 is not yet on the docket.
All right. I also think that some in our audience and our listening audience would be interested in the status on the various tuition revenue bonds, particularly SB 272. Can you elaborate on those?
We have not heard officially any word since that legislation has been filed. We have seen a number of kind of one-off legislation filed about particular projects at a particular system or institution, but the legislation you're referring to is Senator Zaffarini's kind of that captures all the projects that the institutions identified, which I believe were over 70 some odd projects and a couple $1 billion worth of capital improvements. We have not officially heard any movement on that. Either in the Senate, and of course there's no such thing in the House. Again, in the House all we've seen is kind of the individual project bills. So I think that legislation right now is still in a holding pattern, perhaps waiting until some of the budget situation works itself out.
So none of these TRB bills have been scheduled for hearing either?
No, sir. Not yet.
Any other questions? All right. Questions? Okay, that actually concludes the business, I believe, on our agenda.
One more item.
Oh, we do? I'm sorry. I apologize. 4M, excuse me. M. I've got it. Consideration of higher education impact statement for the 82nd Texas Legislature. Dom, you're going to provide us an update on that item?
Yes, real briefly. As you'll recall, in the Senate rules, and this is only in the Senate rules, the Senate rules require of the LBB, and the LBB then requires of us to issue a higher education impact statement for any Senate legislation that will change the operation, function, or organization of higher education generally or an institution specifically. And the first such legislation has been filed, and the first such request has been asked of us. And that you should have a copy, hopefully, of a letter in front of you. And this is related to Senate Bill 324, which would essentially allow for and execute the downward expansion of the University of Houston at Clear Lake from an upper division graduate, junior, senior level institution to a full-fledged four-year institution, I believe effective the academic year 2012-2013. And so this legislation, because it changes the function of an institution, we've been asked to weigh in. McGregor Stevenson's staff has put together a very robust analysis here. They should be commended for the work that's been put into this. We have not been asked to actually submit this yet because the legislation has not been slated for hearing. Per our process, the board has allowed, because of the timing of the legislature, and these requests often come in on very short notice, the board has allowed for the chair, vice chair, and chair of this committee to approve these, subject then to the ratification by this committee and then ratification by the full board. We have received the approval from the chair, vice chair, and chair of this committee, but now I think this item is up for consideration for this committee to go ahead and ratify this so that we can move forward, and we'll bring it to the full board in April. And if there's any particular, the specifics about this, I'm sure McGregor can help answer those.
That was generous.
McGregor, since the copy of the letter doesn't highlight the couple modifications that were made, do you want to just briefly touch on those based on the conversations you had with Harold and I?
I'm going to ask Dr. Davis to come forward. I'm afraid I don't remember which revisions were made.
Kick things to him, it kicks back to me. Good morning.
Morning.
The major revision that was made is there had been a question regarding some of the college-going data that we used. We were using initially data that's found in the American Community Survey, which is the interim study that the U.S. Census Bureau does. We were using that data because the 2010 census data has not been fully disaggregated. The only data that the Census Bureau has released from the 2010 decennial census was for the purpose of redistricting. So we had used American Community Survey data, and the way that that data is disaggregated is they look at educational placement, current educational placement for a population over 3 years of age. So what we had included was the statistics for the 3 affected counties. If this downward expansion goes forward, that showed what the current educational college-going population was, enrolled population was for 3-year-olds and above. There was not data, though, that disaggregates that to look at 18 to 35-year-olds. And the data at the State Data Center is also the data that's used from the American Community Survey. So it wasn't a central piece of our analysis. I think our point that we were trying to get to show educational attainment, we were able to show with the data, with other data from the Census Bureau, so we removed that so that there would be no confusion.
You actually asked that question, and when I saw that, I looked at it and conferred with staff and felt that it wasn't really useful data, and we thought we should remove it from the...
Actually, Vice Chairman Hahn.
Oh, it was you.
Question
Sorry.
the 3-year-olds.
Well, it was a good catch, and
I just indicated there's some really smart kids.
We wanted to catch the precocious ones.
Just because Vice Chairman Hahn started college at age 4 doesn't mean...
I thought it was at 3, but...
Yeah.
But that was New Mexico.
Yeah, that's true. You have to take everything.
That was the only significant change, was the removal
Dr.
of that
Davis,
data.
I was going to ask, there weren't any other
Yes, sir.
language changes?
The material observations and conclusions haven't changed at all.
Not one bit.
That's a key point.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. First of all, I've reviewed this. I have a pretty good insight into what's probably going on down there. And I wholeheartedly support the commissioner's recommendation. I think that the model that is in place represents an effective and efficient use of state funds. It's been in place for a number of years. I don't see any reason to change it because it appears to be working, and that's with regard to UHCL downward expansion proposal. The thing that I find troubling about it, however, is the precedents that we've set, or someone has set, not necessarily the coordinating board, but since 1990, we've allowed 7 other institutions or someone has allowed, not necessarily the coordinating board, they've allowed, and I assume it's the legislature ultimately has allowed, and probably over the objection of the coordinating board's recommendation, to allow 7 other institutions to do exactly what UHCL is proposing to do. So it kind of, I can understand them being a little bit upset, perhaps, with our recommendation, and if they can turn around and say, well, everybody else has been able to do it, why have all of a sudden we're being told that we can't do it? And that's probably somewhat of a legitimate argument. But I have gone on record more than once of saying that this is a duplication of services. I think it's an effective model. Unfortunately, it's been abandoned by 7 other institutions that I think perhaps was not in the best interest of higher education, particularly in our efforts to close the gaps and improve efficiency and effectiveness. And I realize politics is politics, and probably that's the reason it occurred, but I'm going to support the commissioner's recommendation. I don't know whether it'll stand once it gets over on the Hill. Politics, anything can happen in politics, but I think that letter was well done. I won't compliment you on it.
Well, just for the record, the letter doesn't have a recommendation. It makes observations. It certainly could lead to the conclusion that this is not a good idea at this time, but we simply point out the pros and cons of the proposal, and as I said, I think it's easy to conclude that we don't think it's a good idea at this time, but there really isn't a formal recommendation.
Why hasn't, and I go back, the 7 other institutions, and I'm not picking on University of Texas at Tyler, but you had Tyler Junior College, you had University of Houston and Victoria that was sharing the same campus as University of Houston. You had Texas A&M at Texarkana that's on exactly the same campus of Victoria College. Makes, in my opinion, absolutely no sense from a financial standpoint as to why we want to do the downward expansion when there's so many other opportunities to grow those institutions in areas that, Commissioner, you have clearly pointed out. And so, this is my first rodeo in this arena, and I have some opinions, and I think, even though I'll probably get a phone call or 2 after this meeting today, because I'm sure some of my friends are watching, wherever you may be, from my alma mater, but I just, how is these 7 other institutions, if Mr. Chairman, you'll allow me, what's been our position before, and have we been kind of overruled in terms of have we taken this position before? And I hope that we've been consistent in what we're doing here, because we can't control what happens over there, but we can control what's going on in here, and I hope there's a level of consistency in how we have been dealing with this in the past, because that puts us in a better position in terms of supporting the letter that you recommended. I hope there's a level of consistency, particularly under your tenure, in terms of how we've addressed these. What did we do with the UH Victoria proposal? Did we have a letter consistent with this letter here?
We have consistently adhered to standards of effective and efficient use of state funding.
Good for you, sir.
We have consistently adhered to standards of making sure that educational opportunities are available in every region of the state, but not with unnecessary duplication of programs. And I think our recommendations or comments on proposals to expand higher educational operations and opportunities in the state have been overridden through various means. And I would argue for the people, not only for members of this committee, but for people who are listening, I would argue that our observations and our recommendations have been borne out by subsequent developments, that where we've said that we probably weren't ready for a particular institution at a particular moment in time. I think the data afterward have shown that those institutions have grown very slowly. I think that our comments, our observations about downward expansions have been borne out. I think we clearly indicate there's some problems with this proposal at this particular moment. I was troubled about the inefficiency of the large administrative costs at the current institution. I was concerned about the underutilization of facilities, and I was obviously most concerned about the lack of evidence that we need this particular expansion at this particular moment.
Could I ask a brief question, and I'll yield to Fred? Is this proposal significantly different in terms of what the other 7 institutions? In other words, each time these institutions who have partnership in a lot of ways very well with community colleges, and I've given 2 clear examples, which I think are models of efficiency in terms of what was going on in Texarkana and University of Houston Victoria, with them sharing the same libraries, the same student centers, same sharing facilities. These are models of effectiveness and efficiencies, and those are the things that the governor and the legislatures are really looking for. And we disassemble these few isolated situations in this state where we're really effectively, or most effectively in a lot of ways, spending our dollars. And then we go to a more inefficient and more ineffective way to educate kids by duplicating courses, which I don't see where there's any clear indication that they've proven to serve the citizens of Texas in a way that we really need to be serving them. And I've had a little more, I guess, invested in this debate because I've been around it for a long time in a community college level, seeing the downward expansion of UT Tyler, and with Tyler Junior College just located up the street. And then I spent some time on the campus of Victoria College and UH Victoria, and I've recently been up to Texarkana and looked at the situation up there with what I perceived as a wonderful working relationship. And then you've got a lot of brand new buildings located on the other side of the city that are virtually empty, and they had a wonderful working relationship and model, right, if it was just left alone. But I understand politics. I understand how politics goes. I'm looking for consistency in how our board functions and how we evaluate things and the positions that we're consistently taking when these issues come up. And it appears like to me, Commissioner, and I applaud you for that, and your unwavering commitment to efficiency and effectiveness. And Fred, I also commend you as your chairman of this board of continually looking for every way that we can, and regardless of what happens on the Hill, we can still weigh in on this, and whether they agree or don't agree, that's in we put it over in their ball court, let them do what they want. But I don't believe that we should yield a lot of, and we're not. And I applaud you for it. I've said all I need to say. Thank you.
I'd just like to clarify for Mr.
David,
Hilton.
let me ask a question. Just to clarify, is U of H Clear Lake the last upper-level institution?
Last one. It's the last one in the state.
Was that what you were going to?
No, I did want to clarify
And
that the
that's the
model is
problem.
different from those other institutions in that there are no shared facilities. They don't share library. They don't share buildings. Each of those other circumstances they do. But also I did want to add that it was the last one in the
UT
state.
Tyler, to my knowledge, didn't share any facilities.
Neither did A&M Corpus Christi.
Yeah.
But the point that I would make is that two things. One, this does point out the importance of the transfer compact legislation because it will continue to allow the efficiency and transparency of taking students through community college in a clear and a cost-efficient way into the four-year universities. The second thing I would say, having been involved with this same issue myself 22 years ago in Corpus Christi, is that despite what you might think on the surface, at least in the case of Corpus Christi, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts after the change was made. There were some differences, at least in the case of Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, from this legislation. One of the most notable being that university had a 5-year transition plan from the passage of the legislation in 1989 till the enrollment of the first freshman in 1994, which allowed not only that university to prepare itself organizationally, administratively, cost-wise, but it also allowed for Del Mar Community College and A&M Kingsville to make some preparations. And that university went from an enrollment of less than 4,000 to over 10,000 students today, while Del Mar continued to grow and A&M Kingsville has also grown. Some may argue that Kingsville grew at a slower pace than it might have, but they actually have, for the most part, had a very complementary relationship. So the point being that the downward expansion, we've seen models that can be effective, and the other area that has great impact is the community support. The community support for A&M Corpus Christi and its downward expansion was tremendous. That philanthropic and volunteer support would not have been there without downward expansion. So I guess all I'm saying is one size doesn't necessarily fit all. We have had some downward expansions, I think, attain greater synergy and success than others. But I think the handwriting is on the wall that this is the last of the senior institutions, and no community wants that model. They just, right or wrong, the communities don't like the model.
And to underline your point about some have worked, all of these are different situations. UT Dallas was an upper-level institution, I guess up till 20 years ago, but it was one of the original upper-level institutions.
Yeah, didn't the community colleges in the Clear Lake region, weren't they contacted? And
Absolutely. And their comments were, I'd say, for the most part, pretty benign. I mean, they were just non-committal.
But there was not anyone that came out.
Their response was that we're not offering any support, but we're not objecting. Basically, they're just kind of being neutral. Which,
I think it's worth noting that we don't know what they'll do, but when staff met with officials from the system, they noted that they wanted this to go forward now, but they also were mindful of the economic situation, and when they would actually implement this would depend upon current resources available at the time, and they weren't going to immediately implement something if the adequate resources weren't available right now.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make another comment, and I agree with everything Fred says, and in my opinion, this is inevitable. It's the last domino to fall, but sometimes you are right. We do get local politics, and that's what happened in Victoria, and they have a person who's involved in the legislature that has a lot of political influence, and it was a political decision, and I hope now that it's been made that it goes on and works well, hopefully. But I still say that our 2+2 model in terms of how we educate kids is a very effective model. It was proposed by the coordinated board under some strong leadership of people like our commissioner and our present chairman of our board and Ritt and other people. And I think the economic advantages, I've had people come to me, and when I sit on board, and said, we want this, and we want this, and we want this, because it's going to be in the economic, this is going to produce, this is in the best interest of our region in terms of economics. Well, I don't personally believe that our role is to promote the economic development of Pacific areas, geographical areas, and I think our role is to educate kids. Now, I naturally understand that when we do a downward expansion, if our university is built, that what goes along with that is the creation of jobs and the economic growth and development, and we all know that. But I don't think that is our primary mission and goal, is to, naturally we know that's going to add an economic benefit to that region, but I think what needs to be overriding that is what best serves the overall number of students in the state of Texas, and how best can we utilize our limited resources. And the model is broken. It's not going to be fixed. We've got one institution that still exists, and that one will go, that domino will probably fall. So we're really beating a dead horse at this point. But I had to say what I wanted to say. Got it off my chest. I feel better about it. Appreciate it, guys, for letting me say it, and I'll hush.
Well,
and I sincerely mean that. Thank you for allowing me. Let me say, it was therapeutic. Okay?
It beats
cathartic.
I kind of feel like I'm in a joint therapy session here.
I want to.
So I got it off my chest, and I'm okay.
In the process of moving ratification, gentlemen, I do want to say that one of the points that Dr. Golden brought up that is we should keep in front of us is regarding future facility approvals, is really recognizing those downward expansions that are on joint campuses and taking into account the inventory, if you will, of local community college facilities shared by the four-year university as we look at and analyze requested future facility requests. Because I thought that was a good point.
We got a situation, and I don't want to be picking on the Texarkana situation, but we got a bunch of buildings set up there on the Victoria campus that were previously owned by Texas A&M, and they're fighting over who's going to get the buildings. And I don't know how that's going to be settled. They belong to A&M, but Texarkana feels like they donated the land for it, so they're trying to decide who's going to get what. So, but you got a bunch of buildings that are just vacant now. They're not being used by either facility, not Texarkana College or Texas A&M. They're just sitting there, literally empty and decaying.
Well,
as a result of our downward expansion. Which,
since that's not on our agenda today,
I know,
it may be above our pay grade.
But Fred, it did make me feel.
I'm going to move ratification of the impact statement.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that's, there's only one other item on the agenda that we had to hold to the last, and that's lunch. And because of open records, we will adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make one other comment. I want to compliment you on your maiden voyage in terms of sitting at the control tower and being at the helm.
The first formal meeting.
Especially when it was kind of, you kind of had to act on a moment's impulse, but I gave you a little pep talk back there a while ago before you stepped up and started swinging a bat. But I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
And I didn't have to
I'd second that.
gouge you too many times.
Fred only kicked me a couple of times.
No joke. You did a good job. Thanks for filling in. I think we all of us appreciate that.
Thank you.
Even though you're from West and I'm from East.
I know.
So we will break for lunch and then adjourn afterward?
Then adjourn afterward.